This is part 3 of a 3-part series. We invited all of the Norfolk County District Attorney candidates on the ballot to be interviewed. In this series, you'll hear from the 6 that were interested and available. This episode contains references to suicide, sexual assault, and violence. Please do take care while you listen.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Liz Speaks podcast. My name is Liz Speakman, and I'm so happy to be here with you all today. So the purpose of the podcast is to provide information about what's happening locally and give my take on certain things, and then provide opportunities for engagement. So we really want to make sure that you're informed, you have the information that you need, and that you have information about how you can get involved in your community. So today I'm so excited that we have a candidate for the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, Macy Lee. Welcome, Macy.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
So we'll jump right in.
Of course.
So tell me about why you decided to run for District Attorney.
I decided to run because the office needs significant changes, and I'm the only candidate that will be on the ballot on September 1st that can make sustainable and long-lasting change. I have a proven record of extensive leadership, management, and the combination of prosecutorial experience that can bring about and restore accountability, transparency, and integrity in this office.
Great. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your background?
Of course. Do you want me to start personal or professional?
You choose, whatever you pick.
Just personally, I've lived in Milton for the last 23 years. I serve on the warrant committee there, as well as the vice president of the Garden Club in Milton. Gardening is my therapy. I was a former board member of Dove, which is a nonprofit organization that supports and advocates and finds housings for survivors of domestic and partner violence. And I recently recused myself to avoid any conflict of prosecutorial in their mission. I grew up in Boston. My parents are immigrants, but they are and they're not. So I think someone said that they found this part about me interesting. My children are considered to be 6th-generation Americans. My great-great-grandfather arrived in 1600s to work on the Trans-Pacific Railroad, but had to return to China because of the Chinese Exclusion Act. My great-grandfather then also arrived, finished up the railroads, ended up in Massachusetts, in Boston, and he ended up doing laundry for wealthy families on Beacon Hill, and he ended up staying and not returning to China. So he's resting in the Mount Hope Cemetery, which is the oldest Chinese burial ground in New England. Oh, wow. And then my grandfather came, and he settled in New York, and he worked in restaurants and did laundry, and it wasn't until 1964 when they fully repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act, eliminating immigration and citizenship for origins. He was then able to sponsor my grandmother and my parents to New York City, which is where I'm born, right across the street from the Macy's department store. And my brother was there, so he was, I think, 2 years old, and I was the first person in my family to be born as an American.
Wow.
And so it's been a long history of my family. My parents eventually moved to Boston. We first lived on Dwight Street in the South End, and then when the Tai Tung Village government housing project opened up, my parents moved there, and I grew up there, and I lived there until I graduated from high school. I went to Boston Public Schools. I was part of the Boston desegregation mandate by Judge Garrity. So I ended up going to a lot of different schools at a very young age, starting in the 3rd grade, busing to really tough and racist neighborhoods in Boston, and then ended up, I think, settled in a middle school called Phyllis Wheatley, which I loved, and then high school in Boston. So that's my background personally. Professionally, I've been a lawyer for 34 years, 32 of which I've devoted to public service. I started out at a law firm as a summer associate and then as an associate, and I was there for 1 year, made enough money to pay off some student loans, and then moved on to the Attorney General's office. And it was there that was my first experience with public sector work, and I loved it. I was in the Government Bureau in the Attorney General's office under Scott Harshbarger. I was in a unit called the Administrative Law Division. I did a lot of work, and I consider really important cases at a very young age and a sort of starting level as an attorney. I then moved to Ohio My then husband did his residency in Cleveland. So I had both my children there. I went back to a law firm for 1 year, made enough money for the down payment of our first home. And
I see a pattern.
Oh yeah. So the only time I go into private sector
when you need some money
is when I need some money. So I'm clearly broke.
Right, that's right.
I've been in public servant ever since. So that was the first time I became a prosecutor, and it was the prosecuting attorney's office in Cleveland, in Cuyahoga County, which is the largest county in Ohio. And I have a tendency to work for always the biggest offices, and it's the largest prosecuting attorney's office in Ohio. And I started there in the appellate unit. I love appellate work, but then I moved on to doing superior court level prosecutions. So I prosecuted cases from every type of case you can think of: theft, narcotics, child abuse, domestic violence, financial crimes, and homicides. I tried a lot of cases in my career, probably close to 100 cases, while I was there and even in Massachusetts. So we were there for 7 years, and then I decided to try defense work. So the year before we left, and while I was pregnant with my daughter, I hung out a shingle, which I kind of did. I didn't, because all the cases I did were court-appointed indigent clients, and that 1 year really opened my eyes to working on the other side. Yeah. And that opened my eyes to representing clients, to individuals, being their lifeline, their only representation, and advocating for one individual as opposed to a state or in the Commonwealth. And I found that work to be very fulfilling. And I would have continued to do that had we not returned to Massachusetts. So when we returned, we came back here in 2003. My daughter was, I think, 2 to 3 months old at the time. I took 15 months off to care for my children, get my son settled, who was 4 at the time, and my daughter, and I had a wonderful time staying at home with my children. I really loved it. And then went back to work. And I started, when I went back into the workforce, in an office and not at home, because I consider staying at home to be the workforce too. It's a family workforce, because it's a lot of work.
Definitely a full-time job.
It's a full-time job that you don't get paid.
That's right.
Exactly. And I went to work for the Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, so it's a federal intermediary appellate court. I did that for a year, and then I started at the Suffolk County District Attorney's office. I started there as an appellate attorney. I did that for 5 years, handling all types of appeals, and really ended up handling a lot of homicide, first-degree murder cases, Section 33Es, mostly in the Supreme Judicial Court. And then the district attorney at the time, Dan Conley, promoted me to become his chief of the narcotics and asset forfeiture unit. For 10 years, I managed that unit, managed a lot of staff of assistant district attorneys, state troopers that were assigned to the narcotics unit, and as well as the drug control unit of the Boston Police Department, which is the largest investigative unit for the Boston Police Department, and also the Special Investigations Unit. Spent 10 years there doing approximately, 9 wiretap investigations, because I changed the focus from that particular unit to go to the higher level drug suppliers as opposed to bottom level users and distributors. And then I left 6 years ago, and I became an assistant general counsel for the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. I was in the General Counsel's office in the largest secretariat in Massachusetts, and I was the head of litigation. So we handled any and all litigation that came our way when the Attorney General's office didn't want to take it, or worked in conjunction with the Attorney General's office to defend those cases. And I managed a staff of about 7 people. The agency that I work for now, or that I lead, was sued, and it was a lawsuit that challenged the agency's failure to adhere to regulations, timeliness, transparency, and other issues. So I ended up handling that, defending Mass Health on that litigation, or the Board of Hearings is what the agency I work for now. And after I resolved it, the Medicaid director promoted me to become the director of the very agency that I defended, which is the Office of Medicaid Board of Hearings.
Wow.
And I've been the director now for a little over 4 years. I manage about 60 employees. We handle every appeal that's challenging adverse action by Mass Health. So that includes the thousands, close to 1 million members of Mass Health if they choose to appeal. It also involves providers, so any hospital, any Mass Health provider, if there's an adverse action, they can also appeal, and as well as nursing facility discharges, even though they're not Mass Health providers. So I have a staff of about 60, and when I started there 4 years ago, I completely reorganized, restructured, created units so that there's oversight in everything so that we can ensure the due process rights of appellants are protected. And so that's my long history. A lot of different experiences from different places in 34 years.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, thank you for listening to it. It's like reciting my resume.
I am always curious about people's stories as a social worker. I just find people fascinating. So in terms of the Norfolk County DA's office, what do you think is working well and what do you think needs improvement?
There are certainly good people that are working there now, good prosecutors. A lot of my drug investigations went into Norfolk County because drugs, as you know, as a social worker, it's widespread. It's not just one street, one neighborhood, one town, one city. It is worldwide. It's an international issue. And then in terms of the United States, it's a country problem too. And they're different in different parts of our country. And drugs came into Norfolk County. So I worked closely with Braintree, with Weymouth, Randolph, Quincy, Milton, Dedham. Trying to think. I think those were the towns that we ended up seizing narcotics or executing search warrants. Well, the officers did, and I ended up getting to know some of the prosecutors, some of the ADAs that work there, and there's some really good people there. But there seems to be a lack of community engagement that hasn't existed in quite some time. So there's this lack of this disconnect with the community, and there's also seems to be some lack of supervision with that office because, as I don't need to mention about the two really bad cases that happened in the last year or so, that it makes me question about where was the supervision of how someone is charged and how is something ruled a suicide when there appears to be evidence to the contrary, and why was that not looked upon further? As a prosecutor, as an ADA, you should have a natural curiosity to question everything. I mean, that's our nature, is to question everything. And there seems to be a lack of questioning in that office. So there needs to be systemic changes, but long-lasting changes, and it needs to be I think it needs to be handled by someone who's done that before, like myself, who knows how to walk into an organization, study it pretty quickly, get a really good understanding of it, and make immediate changes, and it constantly evolve over time. Because I think government works well for our communities, for our residents, when it's a constant evolution, a constant study of policies, what needs to change, because we change, right? And concerns change and issues change, and you need to respond to that constantly.
So I think there's a lot of people who may not know exactly what the role of the district attorney is. I'm sure you get that when you're out talking to constituents. And so for me, having worked in the field of domestic violence and sexual assault for so long, I've worked a lot with different assistant district attorneys and victim witness advocates, and I've definitely seen that the way that those folks interact with survivors has a really significant impact on the path towards healing. And so I see the crucial role of the DA in our lives. But I think a lot of people, unless you've been involved in the system in some way, just don't totally know what the role and the power is, and why it's important to pay attention to this race in particular. So can you share a little bit about your perspective on the role of the DA?
I think the role of the DA should be impartial. It shouldn't, I mean, it is by election, but it shouldn't be political, because it should be an impartial role so that you can weigh the evidence and come and arrive at the proper outcome. Cases should not be politicized. They should not be used for political purposes. You should not be endorsed by victims' families. It's not a political role, even though it's by election. And it seems to appear that way in this election and in the current administration. So you are the chief law enforcement officer for the county. You are charged as the district attorney statutorily to oversee all crimes that affect your county, that come into your county, all the arrests. And the power is immense because you decide whether something should be prosecuted and how it should be prosecuted. And in doing so, it affects a lot of lives. And it should not be done, it should be done very carefully with the highest level of integrity and input from either a defense attorney and from victims and their families. There's a lot to consider, and it needs to be very carefully undertaken. The role of the district attorney should be someone who is a good leader in the community. Again, we have all tried cases. We wouldn't be where we are today if we aren't trial attorneys or comfortable with public speaking. You do not get to try cases as a district attorney. That is not your role. It's not your role at all. Your role is to ensure that the office is functioning well, effectively, that all staff, not just assistant district attorneys, but all staff are properly trained and they know how to work with the community and continue to engage with the community. And your role, her role, should be to ensure that you have supervisors in place that can oversee that. It comes from top to bottom, and the highest standards must come from the top to bottom. And if you don't have high standards for the office and for yourself as the district attorney, you cannot expect that of your staff or your law enforcement partners. You have to have that across the board. I have that now as the director. I have that when I was the head of the narcotics unit. I have that as a mom. In my family, right?
Same.
Right? Yeah. You know, you're the role model for your family, for your community, for your office, and that seems to be lacking. And there's got to be careful considerations of who's endorsing you. In an election, like I said, it is a political office by election, but it shouldn't be politicized. And I'm seeing a lot of that happening. A lot of that happening. So that's how I see the role.
Excellent.
And someone to continue to engage in the community and also change the culture, because I think everyone saw yesterday the culture that exists, which is absolutely disgusting.
So we're gonna
we'll talk
air
about
this.
that.
We'll air this later, so it won't be yesterday when this comes out. But we can get to that. So
we can get to that, but that's a culture thing too.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll get to that. Let me ask you about you a little bit more.
Sure.
So tell me what makes you uniquely suited for this role.
I'm uniquely suited because no one else on the ballot on September 1st has as I mentioned earlier, the leadership, the management, and the combination with prosecutorial experience. No one else has that. I currently lead a large-scale very public-facing adjudicatory board, and it's very busy. It's probably I'm sure it's like top 3 busy in the Commonwealth, and I've proven that I can do that. I can step into the role. The district attorney's office is not a training ground for new leaders. It is not. You need to start with being a supervisor, maybe running an agency, there needs to be a start before you jump into this very important and powerful role. And without experience, that power can be easily abused. And so you have to be really careful with who comes into this office. And I also think it's time for a woman to be in this role. I really do. We manage households every day, elderly parents, of which I have 2. We're managers by nature, and it is time that our perspectives and our skills that we have to work twice as hard to get and to be recognized to take on this role. I'm also unique in a sense that I'm bilingual. As I mentioned earlier, I was raised by 2 immigrant parents, so it was Chinese at home, English at school. So I'm proficient in both. And I've been in the community in Quincy quite a bit since campaigning. I am proud to say that my Chinese Cantonese has improved since I've been out of Canton, because my mom and dad, we speak something called, we mix Chinese and English, and if I get frustrated with my dad, it goes right into English because I communicate better. But now, because I'm out in the community and engaging in the Chinese community, which it's 40% of Quincy, 20% of Braintree, quite a bit in Randolph. And it's really been great because now I'm like, I know how to say words that I've totally forgotten. And I have that ability to understand the cultural differences in our communities. And those can be barriers to public safety and communications with law enforcement. And I understand that fully, just for myself and for my parents and growing up in Chinatown in Boston. And that's something that I can eliminate. And no other candidate has that experience of understanding the cultural and language barriers. And we have so many wonderfully diverse communities in Norfolk County. The Haitian community, it just, there's a lot. Vietnamese community, Chinese community, you name it, we have it, and it's wonderful. And that's what I think makes Norfolk County so wonderful. But I don't think anyone's been aware of that because I look at the composition of the Norfolk County District Attorney office right now. It does not represent Norfolk County. It does not. Not even close.
And that has an impact, of course.
Yeah, it has an impact because, we tend to be comfortable within, in terms of trusting and engaging with someone that has a similar background. It even comes down to looking like us.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
So very underrepresented, not just in terms of gender, but also in backgrounds, and cultural and language backgrounds.
Yep. So you mentioned a few minutes ago about these two high-profile cases. So can you tell me more about your perspective on those cases?
With regards to the death of John O'Keefe, I only know as much as the public knows. I've never even seen a police report. I've listened and read a lot about it, but I don't have the information necessary to make any concrete decisions. But what I do know, and from what I've read, is that Karen Reed was certainly overcharged. She was overcharged. And it also makes me wonder, given what was released yesterday with the text messages, whether her being a woman has something to do with it, whether she was specifically targeted and dragged through the mud.
Yeah, so these text messages were released, so with recording today on June 5th, they were released yesterday, so they're fresh in our minds. Do you want to comment on those?
They're disgusting. There's nothing short of it. They're disgusting. They're racist. They're misogynistic. They're anti-Semitic. They're hateful, and it brings into a whole light of how I now read interpret the prosecution of Karen Reed. It makes me wonder whether she was targeted because she was a woman. I mean, some of the comments that both Proctor and Good made are disgusting. Yeah, and they're just disgusting. They're vile, and it makes me really wonder whether Karen Reed was targeted because of her gender. Whether let's just pick the woman. I know. Let's just pick her because, they have obviously little to no regard to women.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes me wonder too about hundreds of other cases.
Yes. And we were at a debate last night in Canton that was hosted by the Canton Democratic Town Committee, and I had mentioned that. I said it makes me wonder whether there are civil rights violations involved all the arrests and investigations conducted by Proctor and Good. It makes me really wonder. And that's something that I will look into as district attorney. I handled a similar situation when the Annie Dukin crisis happened with the state police drug lab. And we ended up no processing or dismissing hundreds of drug cases because they were tainted. Right. They were tainted by her lack of integrity. Yeah. And now I wonder, we need to go through every single one of the arrests. We need to go through investigations in which they were involved and see whether they've been tainted, whether there's a systemic pattern of discriminatory law enforcement action. And it would not surprise me if they were. And I always thought Karen Reed was over-indicted. Always thought that. Now I'm just wondering, it just brings to light a lot of other things. And I think it's appalling, it's disgusting. And her gender, I'm a woman too. I can it's bringing all these thoughts in my head.
Yeah, me too. I had to stop reading after a few because it
disgusting.
was making me sick.
And then the other case is
also gender.
The same thing. It's also gender. So you have Karen Reed, who's charged as a defendant, could possibly very well be a victim at this point.
Right.
Very well. In fact, that's how I'm viewing her now, is as a victim. And then Sandra Birchmore is without any doubt victimized by law enforcement officers that should be trusted by the public. And then you have the district attorney's office, who is essentially the gatekeeper of all this, right? It comes to you and the buck stops here, right? Why was there no further questioning about what happened? Why? Why? It just, I feel like there's systemic failures everywhere. And to go back to these text messages, they were investigated, the matter, by the U.S. Attorney's Office, and clearly the text messages were available during the investigation. Why would not, I'm questioning, why did not someone who was overseeing this investigation question possible police misconduct, civil rights violations? It was just, no, we don't want it, we're not taking this case, nothing, that's it. But you have this evidence, sometimes it leads to another path. That always does that. If you're well versed in experience in doing large scale investigations like I am, you always go down paths. And that's the fun thing about wiretap investigation. It leads, it's a web, and it spins, and it keeps spinning. And I look at these text messages, okay, so it may not affect Karen Reed in terms of, there's no evidence of her culpability in terms of murder, but wait a second, we have these text messages. So my question is, why didn't someone who was in charge of this investigation, who looked into it, go down this other path instead of stopping right there? And then now they're released on a civil suit when there's possible evidence of civil and possibly criminal
misconduct.
Liability, misconduct, and that's on the. I don't know what happened in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the person who's. I think one of the candidates who's running for office was the one responsible for investigating this, and I don't know why he did not. And that's a question for him. He did not go down that other path. On these text messages.
I learned about that in watching The Wire.
Everyone remember The Wire? Well, I still had the big cassette. I love The Wire.
So when you say wiretap cases, I'm like, I know all about that because I watched The Wire. Highly recommend for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Yeah, it was an excellent series. I loved it.
So sort of shifting gears a little bit, thank you for your perspective on those cases.
Thank you for asking.
This is a lot. You are busy, you are campaigning, you are working. So what energizes you? What kind of keeps you going?
What energizes me is connecting with the community. I've knocked on close to 1,000 doors since February, and I really enjoy that part of campaigning. It's talking to people, understanding their issues, just meeting people, and meeting them in 27 different towns, some of which I've never visited until I decided to run for district attorney. And that's been just a wonderful experience, going to towns like Medway, Medfield, just Millis, towns that I have no business going to, unless other than running for district attorney. So I really, in Norfolk, found a really great cafe there. And I just, that's been just really fun, just connecting with the community, meeting a lot of people, hearing their issues and concern, and just being present. And that's what I hope to do and continue to do as district attorney. It's not to, ignore the smaller towns, the third tier towns, or even the second tier, but just you owe it to your community. And for me, running for district attorney, I don't feel that I should be asking for your vote until you get a chance to ask me questions and see me. You have that right. Otherwise, why would you vote for me? I wouldn't vote for someone.
How would you know?
How would I know, right? And so to me, that's the best part of this whole experience. And that's what energizes me. If I don't knock on doors every day, that's what.
It's easy to get bogged down in the rest of the stuff, but then when you actually connect with the voters and people in community and hear what's happening for them, that's great. Thank you. So one of the things that's really important for me about this podcast is providing information to people and then an action step. And so if people are listening and they say, "Oh, I really want to help Macy Lee's campaign and pitch in," what do you say for them?
go on my website, check me out, and send an email to my campaign manager, and we'll respond. If you want to host a sign, if you want a bumper sticker, if you want to do a standout on September 1st at your poll, I would love that.
Great.
I would love that. Now, this is as grassroots as it comes. I don't have a machine behind me that's been in politics for over 20 years. I don't have that. I am, the support that I have is every bit of it I've earned. I've earned because I have the reputation of being a hard worker and being a prosecutor with integrity and accountability and transparency. It's folks that I worked with whom I worked. It's my neighbors, my community members. I have an established reputation, not just in Suffolk County, but also in Norfolk County. And so I've earned every vote that I'm going to get. It's earned. It's not somebody out there going to unions and chatting up on my behalf to do it. It's me, and I hope that continues all the way to September 1st.
Great. So thanks for mentioning September 1st. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank
and I'll
you.
do my pitch again. For September 1st is primary voting day. It's a tough day for an election because it's before Labor Day. People are still on vacation. But early voting will be available. Mail-in voting will be available. And just know that in some of these races, it's all Democrats running. And so the election will essentially be decided on September 1st. And so if you're thinking, I'll just wait to November, you want to vote September 1st if you have a Democratic candidate you're excited about, because they may or may not make it to November. So plan on voting September 1st, and we are excited. We'll see you next time. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Liz Speaks. I'm so excited to be here with Greg Connor, who is running for Norfolk County District Attorney. Welcome, Greg.
Hello, Liz. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you. So starting off with kind of the most basic question, tell us why you decided to run for district attorney.
Sure. So I was a prosecutor for 25 years in the DA's office. I started in 96 as an intern under Delahunt and then got hired by Bill Keating, worked my way up. And it's a job I love. I love the work that we do. And I believe that the work's not finished and we have to keep on doing it. But in the same vein, I also recognize there's a crisis as far as confidence in my office, and I want to restore the public's faith back into the office.
Great. So tell me, what do you think is working well currently, and what do you think needs improvement?
So I think the easy thing to start with is what needs improvement. And for me, I think in light of what I've seen in the last, say, 2 years, was that we had an investigator that was a bigoted individual that was investigating crimes that caused a lot of problems in the items he touched. And what that also did was it created that crisis as far as the confidence in the office. And when we had the wrong people investigating crimes, it created this issue where people thought that there was a second tier of justice for like law enforcement opposed to everyone else. And that would go towards the Reed and Birchmore matters. So the good news was in October of 2024, the office asked me to take over homicides, and we started creating new policies in the office to try and fix those problems. First was Michael Proctor had been fired by this point in time. Second, the leadership had changed in the office as far as it was a new first assistant. The state police had completely changed their leadership, not only at the top in general headquarters, but in the office as well, and brought in outside individuals from, say, Essex County, Internal Affairs, Cape Cod or Cape and Islands, and Crime Scene Services to be the new leaders within the office. So with this new opportunity, we created a board of people that in order to charge a homicide case, you had to go through this gauntlet of senior investigators, senior prosecutors, and advocates to show that you had this case ready to charge. And if you didn't, you couldn't charge at the grand jury level. We repeated this process before people went to trial, say 3-4 months before trial, to say, is the evidence still the same that you thought you once had? And should this case be going forward to trial as charged? Should the charges be amended? And so that was a valuable process because no longer could one person own something. Instead, it was more of a collaborative effort. And so that process existed up until when I left in March of 2026. Um, so I think those types of initiatives have helped as far as internally having better prosecutions. I will say some of the things the office has done that I'm extremely proud of is I got to help develop the drug court in the early 2000s that's still in use today, that's given a lot of people a second chance at life opposed to incarceration. They get intensive treatment. We've developed a mental health court. I got to help found the Veterans Court, which was similar to drug court, except it was geared toward, it had more of a mental health component. And we actually brought people who are JAG officers in our office to be the prosecutors assigned to it so that we had this understanding that people who could more relate to the clients of Veterans Court were the public facing individuals of it. So there have been these different initiatives within the office to help people get their lives back on track and also to save lives. For instance, the other thing that I think the office did extremely well with was by partnering with law enforcement and the community coalitions, recognizing in 2010 the overdose epidemic. It spikes at about 2015 to about 180 overdoses, fatal overdoses a year. And what the office did was help get Narcan in the hands of every first responder, including fire and EMTs. And now we have about, I think it was 2025, we had 79 fatal overdoses. So those have been cut by less than half. And so initiatives like that, which aren't seen in the courtroom, but outside the courtroom, is where the office is extremely valuable as well.
Great. So I think there's probably a lot of people who don't exactly know what the district attorney is,
Yes.
what the role is. I'm sure you get that a lot when you're out and about. And so I'm wondering if you can give us like a simple explanation of the role and also sort of how you see the role and sort of it certainly has a lot of power and ability to make decisions about the direction of people's lives. So
Yes.
how you see that.
So, in the most simplistic way of looking at the office is if there is a crime charged in Norfolk County, the prosecutor of that crime would be from the district attorney's office. And so a defendant, the one charged, would go to a courthouse, have an attorney either appointed or hire their own that would safeguard their interests. And the interests of the public is safeguarded by the prosecutor, which would be the assistant district attorney. Now, that is the core of what we do, but then we spread out into other things as far as our community engagement, trying to alert people about the potentials of becoming victims, say going to senior centers and councils on aging, alerting them about scams, then also working with high schools about the dangers of drunk driving and drugs. And so we have a community division that goes out and works with schools and seniors like that. And then we also have, in addition to being in the courtroom, we have lawyers who work on appeals. We have lawyers who work on civil forfeiture from drug cases. So we touch upon other things just besides what you might see in like a television show.
And I know you mentioned the drug court, mental health court, veterans court. I know what those are in my role as a social
Sure.
worker and have seen the benefits of
Yeah.
people being able to access those kind of specialized interventions. But
Yeah.
I think most people probably don't know exactly what that means and why it's such a benefit to people who are struggling. So maybe you could tell us
Sure.
a little bit more about that.
Thank you, because I'd love to. So sometimes they're referred to treatment courts. Sometimes they're referred to as specialty courts. And the reason specialty courts is used is because that's kind of a bigger umbrella. Because we have, for instance, a domestic violence session, and so we have other things. But those really aren't. Domestic violence session isn't so much a treatment court, but where the lawyers concentrate on one issue when they're prosecuting it in that individual session. But treatment courts, like drug court, veterans court, mental health court, those are courts that are designed to give people intense probation as part of their disposition. And that is to be done as opposed to incarceration. So the idea is that you are looking at a potential lengthier incarceration sentence. And this will give you the chance to have the tools to get your life back on track. And so our first one that we did was the drug court, which goes back to about 2000, 2001. It started right before I got in, and then I got to help develop it and grow it. And that was an 18-month probationary period that could go up to 2 years, designed to give people intense probation that was dealing with their addiction issues. Um, the intriguing thing for that treatment court was you had to make sure you found the right candidate to go in it. You did not
Hmm.
want to put the dealer in with the users. But the interesting thing about drugs is so many people deal to use. So
Right.
it was never really a bright line. What it became is more of like an in-depth screening to figure out who should go in there.
Hmm.
Who was the person that was looking to get sobriety? And the other interesting thing I found about that was it was kind of an all hands on deck, a multifaceted approach to try and give people the tools they need to sobriety. So that's one. And then mental health court in Quincy, it's a post-dispositional court. So someone has to be pled guilty usually, and then they're put into mental health court,
Hmm.
and it addresses their mental health issues. I'm actually a proponent of a pre-dispositional mental health court because I
Hmm.
think that um, sometimes when you have an individual who's going through mental crisis, they're not criminally responsible enough to plead guilty to understand what
Right.
they did. So
Yeah.
a pre-dispositional mental health court might be the better way that we should start looking about things. And Veterans Court was similar to drug court, where in about 2011, we were realizing that veterans were having a tough time getting back to civilian life
Yeah.
and dealing with severe mental health issues like PTSD. And that is then those are being commingled with addiction issues. So Veterans Court not only addresses those issues, but then gave people the opportunity to work on housing, which is a giant problem for vets.
Mhm.
It gave them the opportunity to get employment, again, a giant problem. And so it also gave them this kind of more focused community-based therapy where people who were in the session were going through the same issues they were. And
Mhm.
so the next one that I'm trying to get underway, and we started working on it before I left, and it's one of my priorities, is an emerging adults court. And this would be something similar to that predispositional issue I was talking about. So in 2024, the court comes down with this Mattis decision, recognizing, that the science says that the prefrontal cortex
Mhm.
of developing brains is not the same for 18 to 24-year-olds as it is as they get older. Not a
Yeah.
big surprise. Young
Right.
people make mistakes. So did I. And
Mhm.
so,
Same.
exactly. Oh, congratulations, Liz. You and I are human.
I am
Um,
human. Thank you.
yes. And so, with that, the western part of the state had already created what they call an Emerging Adults Court of Hope. Um, I took my inspiration not only from that, but from the Mattis decision in recognizing that if we could do a predispositional court for 18 to 21-year-olds and for nonviolent offenses, and we give them all the benefits of intense probation and dealing with addiction and mental health issues, but also trying to get them work, get them professional licensure, or get them the ability to get education. If we can do all of that and they get out of this with no criminal record,
Mhm.
they're going to have a much better chance at life opposed to having a conviction for, say, possession with intent to distribute drugs at 18 years old.
Right.
And so that's the motivation behind that. And I think it seems like the court is very excited about it because the success that they've seen in the western part of the state. And I think that also everyone has to be open to different approaches when they look at these things. For instance, the Springfield one goes 18 to 24.
Mhm.
I was envisioning 18 to 21. So I think you have to be able to say, wait a second, what are the different thoughts here on how to do this? But I'm very excited about it because I've dealt with young people and I've seen them get a conviction early on in their life. And I'm like, this is not going to help.
Right.
And on nonviolent offenses, it's a little bit easier because you're not delaying, say, a victim from getting justice. You
Right.
can actually deal with these things that, for instance, drug cases, they're really not going to go anywhere. We
Right.
can, if the person doesn't complete the probation, the case just goes back to the trial list and we prosecute them.
Yep.
And the drugs are waiting there to be done. So I think that but if people on the violent side, if the victims were on board, I'd be open to it.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, I mean, I've certainly seen, and we know that research indicates that when someone enters the criminal legal system,
if they become incarcerated, they get a record, like that just really changes the path for the rest of their life. I mean,
Does.
and so if we can put in other types of supports and interventions and give them a chance at least, and some people are going to keep doing what they're doing and,
Right.
go through the system. But for a lot of people, I think, you get a shoplifting charge.
Yeah.
You're struggling with substance use and, poverty. And so you're stealing stuff from CVS.
Hmm.
Maybe getting some supports in place might be better than going to jail and heading down that path. So I think
Yeah.
specialty courts can be incredibly impactful.
Anecdotally, I remember it was probably close to 25 years ago when I started. I saw a young woman in Quincy District Court. She was convicted of larceny. At that point, it was a felony to have a conviction over $500. And the judge goes through, like, this is your probation. And so she now has this felony conviction, young woman. And at the end of this discussion with the judge, and there's a number of us in court waiting to have our case called. He goes, "No, where are you going to next?" She's like, "Well, I'm going to go to Friendly's. I have a job interview to become a waitress." And at this point in time, like all of us are looking at each other like she's going to have to go check that she's convicted of a felony when
Yeah.
she applies for this job.
Right.
And so I think about that all the
Yeah.
time about what are the collateral effects of when someone gets a felony conviction. And so that's why,
Housing. There's,
housing, you try getting a college loan, right? Like that's
right.
not going to happen.
I know.
And so, with a felony conviction, particularly one for like larceny, and you're talking, and by the way, what you just talked about as far as the shoplifting from CVS, that was pretty much what was happening there. She was
Exactly.
stealing to fund her addiction.
Yep.
And so that's why an emerging adults court, I think, would be valuable. And, drug court is interesting because it's not just a second chance. Like, it's not like you're going to be sober like that.
Right. Right.
Sobriety is a real tough journey, and it's not a straight line. And so these courts, they're not just second chances; they're like third, fourth, fifth.
Hmm.
And so the idea is that we want to give you the tools. So, and I will tell you anecdotally as well. When I started in the office, 18,000 cases in Norfolk County annually. We're at about 10,000 cases annually. So crime is coming down.
Yeah.
And we've seen Concord close, we've seen Walpole Prison close, and the Norfolk House is at a fraction of what it used to be. So less people are incarcerated and we have less crime. I have to say that you have to look at programs like specialty courts as one of these things that are helping that out.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's great. I'd love to see more of that in our county.
Yeah.
Um, so, Greg, what makes you uniquely suited for this role?
Okay. Well, I guess I'd probably point to a couple different factors or three. One is my history within this county. I'm a lifelong resident in Norfolk County, with the exception I went to Boston College and BC Law School. So I did live in Suffolk and Middlesex for a short period of time. But my family has been in Norfolk County since about 1900, and I'm a second generation attorney. My father was a prosecutor too. Um, I've lived here, I've raised my kids here, and so I know this area very well. With that, my experience in the office, I know the building blocks for success to create a positive office. I've had the opportunity to work for three different DAs. I saw the Delahunt era as far as a gold standard in prosecution and how it approached domestic violence, became like a national model,
Hmm.
and helping create the 209A order.
Hmm.
Um, I would
Which
say,
is a restraining order for those that don't know.
thank you, Liz. I guess I get a little too nerdy on my stuff, so thank you.
Yeah. Most people actually don't know what a 209A is.
Yes. And so, and they also helped, and, Delahunt also helped get 24-hour responses from judges to issue those orders.
Yep.
So, I got to see that. And then under the Keating era, I saw the beginning of the community coalitions and the value of getting out into the community. In fact, when I worked for Bill, I was regularly going to high schools. I was regularly going to councils on agings, and I saw that community integration really work. Then under the Morrissey era, where they attacked the overdose epidemic, and how he was able to utilize the Sackler money, the
Hmm. Hmm.
and put that in the hands of the community coalitions to help fight the overdose problem. I realized that not only do I have this experience of being in the courtroom and managing different divisions in the office, like motor vehicle homicides, white collar, and the district courts, but I also did a series of homicides. I got to see how the office can grow into the next sphere of outside the courtroom. Um, and so I think that that helps, but I also think that my experience in the courtroom is extremely valuable because I know the value of a case. I know how to prosecute these cases. And I don't think anyone else in the field can say that they've prosecuted a case in Norfolk County, let alone some of the most complicated cases in Norfolk County. I've prosecuted homicides, I've prosecuted white collar, I've done public corruption, I've prosecuted police officers, I've prosecuted corrections officers, lawyers, clergy. There's hardly anyone that I haven't had to prosecute because of being in there for 25 years. So with this experience, and with this connection to the community and the understanding of the value of the office, I think that that makes me the most qualified person for the job.
Thank you. So we know there's been two high-profile cases. You mentioned Karen Reed and
Mhm.
Jennifer Birchmore. And so I'm curious about your perspective on those cases.
Sure. Um, so, as a person who's done high profile cases, I understand, the public's desire to consume these things. And so I would say when I look at these two cases, the biggest problem I saw was the wrong people were investigating them. And then when I looking at Reed in particular, when you have officers who know everyone involved, it creates a problem, and they should have been rotated out, and we should have had objective eyes come in and redo that case at a minimum at the beginning. We could have done that as soon as it was revealed that the Canton officers and the state troopers knew too many of the parties involved. But what also I saw in that case was it was overcharged. When I watched the first trial, um, I saw a case where they were litigating whether or not the truck hit John O'Keefe and not why the truck hit John O'Keefe. And so for me, that's not a homicide case, a second degree or first degree. To me, this is a question of whether or not you have a motor vehicle homicide case. And that's a very big difference. And I think when you look at the jury's verdict in the second trial, you have to hear that because they didn't come back with a motor vehicle homicide. In fact, I think that they show that the Commonwealth didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the truck did hit John. So when I look at the Birchmore case, I see a similar issue of we have investigators who know everyone involved investigating the case. And so to me, what should have been done is that case should have either been gone to another detectives unit in another DA's office, which would have been the easiest no cost thing to do, or you could have brought in another detective from another department to be embedded in our office and use those resources. But where the investigators knew the people involved as far as having a history with working with them, it reduced the idea that there was objectivity in that case. And that was a big problem. And then I also see when the medical examiner's office rules it a suicide, and Dr. Capo Martinez and Dr. Hels stand by that conclusion. But then Dr. Bodden's hired by the family, and he declares it's a homicide. That was a missed opportunity. The office should have sent that case to what's called a judicial inquest. And we've done it twice before in my career. And both times when we did it, and we gave this information to a judge, and in a judicial inquest, the prosecution has like a mini trial. They put on all their evidence. The suspect puts on all his or her evidence, and the family can even put on evidence, and the family can get a lawyer to be there. And it can be appointed at no cost.
Yeah.
Had that been done, like it had been done in the past, judges with objective eyes go, Commonwealth, you have it. You need to go to a grand jury. And that was done twice in my career where the judge said, you have it, go to a grand jury. One case went to trial. It was a not guilty, so be it. And the other case was eventually dismissed because that defendant had other charges in the South in which she answered on. And it seemed futile to bring her up here and prosecute her for the other case. So with that, there was a path forward that was not used or utilized by the office. And that was a big problem. And so that's one of the reasons that I think my experience of knowing these factors and knowing how to do these things I could bring to bear and help the office. It was frustrating to see it not being done. And, uh, I'm busy doing my work, trying my cases, and, you come up for air and you're like, wait a second, why isn't this being done? And so it was a frustrating experience.
And I guess I'm curious, were there any parts that you kind of look back and think you could have done something more, having been in that office, in that space?
So no, because so if you look at that timeline, particularly from the start of the Karen Reed case, I was trying homicides regularly. And trying homicides takes a great deal of time. You have to be really lasered in and focused doing it. In particular, I was trying Emmanuel Lopes, and I had to do that twice because a juror wouldn't deliberate on the first trial. That that takes about 4 to 6 weeks to try that case, but it takes about 6 months to prepare it.
Mhm.
And then we tried it again the next year. And again, that was a similar time frame. So all of your energies and focus are going to that. In the meantime, the Brian Walsh case gets assigned to me. And when I finished Emmanuel Lopes, it was almost immediately like, we have to get this case that is legally challenging, where you have no body. And you have to get this up and running. In the meantime, what you find out is you have an investigator that has been identified as completely misogynist, and you can't use that person. And I put that in writing. I would not use that person. So with that, with what I was doing, I didn't have the ability to handle those other matters. And they were being led by the then first assistant who eventually retired. And once she retired, that's when the office came to me and said, would you take over managing homicides? And it was an uphill battle because you had to get into every case and take yourself out of cases that you thought you were going to be trying. And so it was in October 2024, I took over that role. And that's when I truly got to see, like, these are places where we can have greater success if we work more collaboratively.
Mhm.
When it was being done, when things were being siloed, that's where you see these mistakes in judgment that you have to try and fix.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Um, so you've been campaigning for a while. I know it's a lot and you have a family. So Greg, what energizes you? What kind of keeps you going?
Actually campaigning. So it's funny, I've never done this before and really didn't know what I was getting into. I called a bunch of people who have run races before, and I also found when I called them, each one of them, I would ask, would you do it again? And
Hmm.
to a person, they all said yes, whether they won or they lost.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these people I talked to, they were first-time politicians. And I said, well, what am I in for? And I really never got the blueprint of what I was in for.
Hmm.
But then when I got out there, every day I've got the opportunity to talk to people, and that has been energizing. And I can't say that I'm an extrovert, but when I talk about the job and I talk about the law, and we educate each other about their issues and I educate them about the law, that's really, really fun. That's great. And so I've enjoyed doing that. And so while I wake up in the morning, I'm like, okay, where am I going to today?
Right.
And what 4 or 5, 6 events are we going to do? There's at every single one of them, there's people there that you're like, you have this interaction, it's great. From knocking on doors to going to a candidates forum, to this weekend we have the Milton Pride parade, or not parade, but the Milton Pride event. And you
Mhm.
just get out there and you talk to people, and it's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. More fun than I thought it was going to be. It's tiring. They're long days, but it is a lot
Yes.
of fun.
Yes. That
Yeah.
was my experience when I ran for school committee. And I sort of relate it to when you have a baby, you can't really be prepared. Like people can
Yeah.
tell you what it's like, but until you're doing
Yeah.
it, you can't really know. And
Yeah.
so, like, once you're in it too. It's not
Right.
like you can be like, actually, this is not my
Yeah.
thing. So hopefully you like it.
Yeah, the former mayor of Brockton, Bob Sullivan, he was one of the guys I talked to. And the last thing he said to me was, make sure you have fun.
Totally.
And that has stayed with me
Yeah.
and was to make sure you have fun. Another person said when they ran for office, they said, I was going to do two things. I was going to tell the truth and I was going to get in shape because he was knocking on so many doors.
True. That's also
I'm
true.
so I'm trying to do that as well.
Yeah.
The 9:30 dinners are awful,
Oh,
but the
I
rest of
couldn't
it's
do
been
that. There's no way. I couldn't. No, I'd have to say no. I know Courtney's keeping you busy, which is why we're doing this on Zoom. You have
Yes.
a full day on
Thank
on
you
the
for
day of
accommodating me. I
PPD. Yeah,
appreciate
of
it.
course. Yeah, I'm glad we're able to do it. So as we wrap up, one of the big things for this podcast is giving people kind of an action item
Yep.
that they can do. So if folks are listening and they think, oh, this is the guy, I really want to help out, I want to get involved, what can they do to get involved with your campaign?
Okay, so I'm going to give you three things. Um, First is if you want to get involved with the law and you're young, I'm going to suggest get an internship. Do that,
Mhm.
and you're going to have a great time. You're going to learn a lot. And my favorite thing is to get young people who aren't in law school yet to come to the DA's office and go, I hate it. I don't want to do it anymore. Perfect. Great.
Absolutely. Good to know. Yep.
Second thing is if you're more advanced and you want to get involved in the criminal justice system, contemplate C4RJ.
Is
These
that an
are
organization?
it is it
Okay.
is so it's so C4RJ, they are doing restorative justice programs, and they are making penetration in Norfolk County, but they're in Plymouth, they're in Suffolk, and go to their website. But I have a friend who has been doing restorative justice at the Norfolk prison with lifers,
Mhm.
and it's victim based, and they are looking for volunteers. If you're interested in that, check it out. Because, listen, the last thing I'm going to do is tell you about my campaign. But if you're interested in restorative justice, I was talking to a woman last night who's involved with C4RJ, and you can do it at different levels, but it's really victim based. And it could be an alternative for people from getting into the system, which is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, I need
Um,
restorative justice. Maybe we'll have them on the podcast at some
Check
point.
them out.
Yeah, I will.
They're really cool. And then as far as my campaign, if you go to Greg Connor 4 DA, the number 4 DA, we have our website. There are opportunities to volunteer, but we're always looking for people to help knock on doors, to hold signs, to drop lit. And so we need as much help as we can get. And and we have a great group, a lot of lovely people from all over the county, and a lot of them don't have the last name Connor, so you're going to meet some people that aren't related to me. But I would really appreciate all the help, but also those other two things. If you're young and you're interested in criminal justice, check out an internship at either the DA's office, trial court, or public defender's office. But if you're interested in restorative justice, C4RJ.
Love it. Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Appreciate you taking the time to talk with
Thanks,
us.
Liz.
And I just always encourage people to knock doors, get your
Yes.
steps in, get to know your community. And the second point I always like to make is September 1st.
Thank you.
A lot of us are thinking November for the election, but September 1st is when the Democrats sort of will pick who moves on. And since a lot of our offices are really only Democrat, a lot of these decisions on the ballot will be made on September 1st. So just encouraging people to get out. On that day and also November, but don't forget about September 1st.
Thank you, Liz.
All right, take care. Have a good
You
day.
too. You as well. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.